You're going to need at least one buddy and preferably more today. We're going to be working in pairs or small groups throughout much of the morning. So kind of look around you and figure out who your conversation team is going to be, a group of 2 to 4. And if you're not connected, go ahead and do that too. You're going to need a device. Go. You need a team of 2 to 4, and your team needs a device, something that can connect to the internet. You should fire that device up ASAP. So I get a lot of opportunities to work with schools, and I get a lot of opportunities to work with teachers and administrators, and I don't get enough opportunities to work with kids because they always blow my mind. And occasionally I get a chance to work with school board members or parents and so on. It's always fun, and I'm just really happy to be here. And let's just talk about some stuff, okay? So let's start with this idea that the narrative around youth use of technology right now is primarily negative, right? So we see headlines like this, or this, or this. And these narratives, these rhetorics that play out in the media shape our thinking, and they shape the thinking of our parents and our communities about what kids are doing with tech and so on. And I think it's important to offer different kinds of narratives and different kinds of rhetorics around kids. So I'd like you to meet Martha. Martha is a 9-year-old in Scotland, and she goes to school every day, and her lunch looks something like this. And she says, you know, that's not very appealing, and there's not very much there. In fact, when I go up and I ask for more, they say no. So Martha, brilliant 9-year-old that she is, she decides to start taking pictures of her lunch and throwing them up on a blog, which she called Never Seconds, because you can never get seconds. Right? And Martha, the budding foodie that she is, she decides to come up with her own rating scheme. So she has things like, this lunch is a 6 out of 10 on the foodometer, or health rating of 4 out of 10, or the always crucial pieces of hair, 0. Right? So she keeps taking pictures of her lunches. She keeps blogging about them. You know, luckily, still in the clear on the pieces of hair front. And after a while, she starts recognizing that for whatever reason, she's starting to get traffic. In fact, she blogs one day, hey, my dad told me I've got 42,000 hits on my blog, and I hope one of them was Jamie Oliver, the famous chef. And of course, the internet being the internet, within 24 hours, Jamie Oliver had found her. And within a week, he'd sent her an autographed copy of the book. Martha keeps blogging. Unfortunately, her pieces of hair streak is broken. And her audience continues to grow, which is sort of cool, right? So one of the things that happens is that other young student foodies start to find her, and they start sending her pictures of what they have for lunch. So this is a lunch from Taiwan. Look what we get to eat. Right? And this is from Canada. And this is from the Czech Republic. And by now, most of us in America are thinking things like, wow, look, they use real dishes. Martha gets to go on a TV show of another chef in the United Kingdom, Nick Nairn. And unfortunately, also while she's on the show, Nick uses it as an opportunity to have a conversation with people about the quality of school lunches in the United Kingdom. Unfortunately, what should have been a highlight for Martha of her life turns out to very quickly become a downer, because the next morning after she appears on this show, she's called into the principal's office, and she's told that the school council, what we would call a school board, has informed her that she no longer is allowed to take pictures of her lunch. Now, the internet being the internet, within, just a few hours, the outrage begins. Right? People holding strong, marshaling support for Martha's cause, and eventually the school council actually has to back down. And instead, they do what they should have done in the first place, which is instead of censoring Martha, this enterprising 9-year-old, what they do instead is they start to have a conversation about the quality and quantity of lunch for their kids. Right? So here's a young lady who at age 9 is starting to impact her community positively in ways that she didn't anticipate when she started. Martha's fame continues to grow. She gets to appear on television shows. She finally meets Jamie Oliver. She shows up on the BBC. She starts winning national awards like Scotland's Public Campaigner of the Year award. She gets to meet Bean. Right? And maybe most impressively of all, in addition to all the public conversation that Martha generates, is that she also uses her blog as a platform to raise money for an organization called Mary's Meals, which eventually uses her funds to create a food kitchen in Malawi for the food insecure to the tune of about $200,000 US, excuse me. And the wonderful thing about the era in which we now live is that there are many, many Marthas. So for example, here's Emma. She's in New York City. Not content with merely blogging since age 13, she's now working on a documentary project with her friends to show how teen girls' bedrooms are manifestations of their identity formation. Wow. This is Josh. I met his mom in Iowa. This is a kid from Ames, where I live. So I'm talking to his mom, and she said, I got to tell you about my son. I said, all right. She says, my son makes Pokemon videos. Pokemon walkthrough videos. I said, oh, you mean like those videos where they walk you through the game and they give you the tips and tricks about, what to click on and how to kill the boss here so you get the magic sword and whatever. She says, yeah, he's been making them since 8th grade. And we thought it was stupid until we realized that as he's heading into college at the end of his senior year, he just got an offer from the company for $8,000 a month. I said, okay. So that's Josh. This is Tabby from Oak Park, Illinois. She's a 16-year-old founder and editor-in-chief of Rookie, which is an online style magazine that's gotten a lot of acclaim. This is Nick from Britain. He developed an app when he was 15 that shortened news stories, and automatically summarized them to just a few sentences, and then he sold it to Yahoo 2 years later for $30 million. This is Maud. She's a high school freshman in Los Angeles. You can see that she's completely and utterly mastered the power of Twitter and social media, 169,000 followers and so on. This is Kayla, age 13. She's a writer. Her favorite subject is science. She's written 27 stories on platforms like fanfiction.net. You can see that she's already received almost 5,000 reviews. She's written over 500,000 words. She's writing book-length stories here and fulfilling her interest to be a writer. This is Lauren. She's a 7th grader in Antioch, California. She just had to go home so that she could launch her Hello Kitty doll 93,000 feet into space and video it along the way. This is Cassandra. She's a middle schooler from Fremont, California. She's got an Etsy shop that completely sells out of anything that she makes. This is Catherine DeMaria from Dearborn, Michigan. At age 12, she decides she wants to rebuild a Pontiac Fiero, and she's got 4 years to do it because her license is at age 16. Inspires the online Pontiac Fiero community to get involved. They help her, guide her, find parts, paint, etc. They've been following her and helping her for years. Her car was ready by 16. This is Matthew Swain, age 11, also from the United Kingdom. He created a blog to encourage other boys to read. This is Kelsey, age 9, from Waco, Texas. She's one of the contributors to the rapidly growing Rainbow Loom video community. This is Zev, a 14-year-old from Massachusetts. He makes really, really interesting self-portraits. There's another one just for fun. There's the Harry Potter Alliance, which is an online association of youth all over the world. They have now led over 40 different campaigns. They buy books for libraries. They fight for immigrant rights. They advocate for chocolate that doesn't depend on child labor from Africa, and so on. This is Kevin Kerwick, age 17, a football captain from Osseo High in Osseo, Minnesota, right, which was Susan's old district, right? And he decided that rather than feed into the negative stereotypes around media use by teens, that instead he would start an Osseo Nice Twitter account where he would share out nice things that were happening within the school and other players and other students within the building. That actually was then the inspiration for the West High Bros Twitter account in Iowa City. It's also the inspiration for the Ames High School Iowa Compliments page on Facebook and so on. And if we had said to teens, hey, we're going to create an online space where you can say nice things about each other, they would have laughed in our face. But when it's organic and it comes from them, it's very powerful. This is Sam Fatala. He's from Linmar, Iowa. He makes videos that will take your breath away. Astounding young man with a brilliant career in videography. And these are the teens from Todd County High School in South Dakota who were so mad that ABC News did a special on Children of the Plains where they were talking about drugs and crime and all the negative things, violence that were in their community. They decided to fight back, and they made a video on YouTube that actually probably got about as much attention as the ABC special, where they talked about how they were about more than that. They were about passion and voice, humility and creativity, respect and family and love, and so on. And by exercising that voice, they reclaimed the power that adults tried to take away from them. Turn to your neighbor and talk for just a minute about what's in your head right now as I share these stories of extracurricular empowerment through technology. Go. Okay, let's come on back. Let's come on back. Now's the time to grab your device. If you haven't yet navigated to that web address, now is the time. And you will see up at the top of our page at this web address that there's a big red link that says our back channel. Okay, it says our back channel. If you go ahead and click on that red link, it should open up a new tab for you or a new space. And you should see something there that invites you to go ahead and join in and say hi. We're going to test our back channel here. So, first of all, navigate to that link if you haven't done so already. And then once you're there, you should see a red link that says our back channel. Go ahead and click on our back channel link and log in and say hi to everybody. If you got a Twitter ID, you can share that too. Okay, I'll give you about another 30 seconds with this web address. Then it's going to disappear. Once you get there, look for the red link at the top that says our back channel. Go ahead and click on that red link. Sign in and say hi. All right, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Okay, there's our link, our back channel. You need to show up. You'll show up here. Hey, hey, look, we're starting to say hi. Awesome. Good job, everyone. Excellent work. Thanks for chiming in. You guys are rocking out. Some of you even said thanks for the coffee and muffins. Awesome. Okay, cool. So way down at the bottom, right? So we're going to use this back channel all day. Sign in, say hello. If you're on Twitter, here's our hashtag, INELearn. And then also my Twitter ID is Mcleod, and so on. Otherwise, we'll rock out. Okay. Oops, wrong way. This way. Okay, cool. So when I think about what we see from those examples I just showed you, I think it's pretty clear to us that our kids are operating at some pretty high levels of thinking outside of school, right? So if we take Bloom's taxonomy, for example, and we think about the work elements that I just showed you that those kids were engaging in at home, away from formal school institutions, right? Most of us would say that they're pretty high up on Bloom's taxonomy in order to accomplish much of that work, right? They're thinking critically, they're solving problems, they're communicating and collaborating, they're getting a chance to be creative, and so on, right? If we look at Webb's depth of knowledge wheel, which is really what underpinning the Common Core movement right now across the state. I understand you guys have made some decisions about that lately. But nonetheless, whether we look at Bloom's or we look at Webb's and the circle, right, our kids are functioning at some pretty high levels. Now we have to contrast that with what we typically see in school. What we see in most of our classrooms right now is about 80 to 85% of day-to-day work by kids, whether it's elementary level, middle school level, high school level, and all parts of the system. About 80 to 85% of kids' day-to-day classroom work is low-level thinking work. It's the lowest ends of Bloom's. It's factual recall, it's procedural regurgitation. It's not that kind of high-level stuff like I just showed you. It's basically spitting back stuff. And so when I talk with educators, I say that one of the three big shifts that we're going to have to wrap our head around as school system and as educators is the shift from low-level thinking to higher-level thinking, right? Much of the stuff that falls in that 80 to 85% band that we ask kids to do on a day-to-day basis can be found on Google in about 3 seconds. And so whatever value used to accompany that surely has diminished even further with the advent of the web, because now it's really not what you know, it's what can you do with what you know. How can you apply it? How can you use it? How can you put it to work? How can you think about it? How can you problem solve with it? And that's a whole different ballgame, right? It's not that they don't need to know stuff, it's that they need to go beyond that. And so we've always taken that Bloom's pyramid stuff, those lowest levels of knowledge and understanding and so on, and where they were supposed to be a foundation upon which we built to then do higher level work. But we spend so much time on it and give it so much attention in terms of assessment and curriculum and so on, that essentially becomes a ceiling, not a floor, for most kids. Right? And we know in particular that some of our most disadvantaged student populations have the fewest opportunities to live at the highest levels of thinking work. So one big shift that we need to navigate somehow as systems is how to shift from lower level thinking to deeper learning. Now there's a second big shift that we need to make, which is the shift towards greater student agency. If you think about how kids spend a typical day with us, they're essentially told what to do every minute of every day of every week. And if they deviate from that at all, they get punished, they get disciplined, or they get in trouble. Often if they even ask questions like why, right? Where they get smacked down pretty hard. And if you think about the kind of powerful work that I showed you at the beginning of our time together, that's very student-driven work. That's not adult-driven work. That's student-driven work. It's where students are building on their interests and their passions, and they're taking charge of their own learning processes and their own work processes. In other words, they have very high agency. They have very high control and ownership of what they're doing, which contrasts very starkly with what they get to do in school most of the time. Right? How often do kids in your classrooms get a chance to really pursue something that's of interest to them? That's a passion. How often do they get a chance to make choices about what they learn, how they learn it, and so on? Probably not too often if you're like a typical school district. And then our kids go home to become really powerful learners where they can self-direct and orient in ways that they need to. And again, very, very different from what they experience on a day-to-day basis in classrooms. So a second big shift that we need to sort of wrap our heads around as educators is the shift from teacher-directed learning spaces to more student-directed learning spaces, where students have greater agency over what they do more often. Not all the time, but more often. And then the third big shift, of course, is the shift from analog to digital. It's this shift from old ways of ink on paper to this idea that technology now suffuses and mediates everything we do. There is no foreseeable future in which the primacy of printed text is not superseded by digital text and digital media. Right? In other words, we're never going back to ink on paper. That's not happening. The sooner we start making those transitions to digital and all the affordances that it gives us and all the concerns that it lays out for us, the better, because we have to start wrapping our head around what that means. And we can't continue to prepare students for technology-suffused learning spaces and workspaces in analog environments. The relevance gap there is too big. So 3 big shifts. The shift from low-level thinking to high-level thinking, the shift from teacher-directed to greater student agency, and the shift from analog to digital. These are all huge, huge shifts that schools need to make. And any one of them alone would be challenging enough. But when you put all 3 together, it becomes really, really difficult for us to adapt, and particularly to adapt quick enough. But the question we have to ask ourselves is this: do you want more Marthas? Do you want more Joshes? Do you want more Zevs and Tavis and so on? I do. I want kids who can do amazing things, who can make a difference in the world, right? Who know how to be self-directed learners and powerful workers and can actually make a dent in the universe. That's what I want our kids to do. And that's a lot more inspiring, to me at least, than a kid who can simply fill out a few bubbles on a piece of paper. So the question is, what do you want? What do you want your kids to be able to do? And if you want more of what we saw at the beginning, then we have to start designing our learning spaces to make that happen, right? And of those 3 big shifts, the one that's going to be the hardest for us is the student agency one, because we do not want to give up control. That scares us. That makes us nervous and anxious. And that's going to be the most important one of all in the long run. Okay. So whenever you see red on our agenda, that's an interaction opportunity. It's a participation opportunity. It's something that you should click on, right? And so what I'd like you to do is like you to click on question 1. And it says, how are you doing with these 3 big shifts? And what evidence do you have? So click on that link. It should take you to our back channel, talk in your groups, and record your answers in our conversation space. I'll give you a few minutes. Go. How are you doing with the 3 big shifts? And what evidence do you have? Throw them up here. All right, come on back. Some good discussion going on there. So now the fun part begins, right? Which is that, okay, Scott, we buy in. 3 big shifts. Sound good? We want more Marthas, right? But how do we know it when we see it? Well, it's one thing for me on stage to run through a couple examples of kids doing cool stuff at home, stuff that's inspiring and neat. It's a whole other thing to make that happen in the classroom. So we're going to spend much of our morning together looking at various examples and talking with ourselves about, is this what we mean by this? Is this what we're striving for? And trying to wrap our head around, how do we think about and dissect and analyze classrooms that are aiming for greater agency, greater tech infusion, and deeper learning? Okay? Because that's really where the critical work needs to happen. Because if we can do that with somebody else's lesson, then we can do that with our own, right? Okay, so we're going to start with Mystery Skype. How many of you are familiar with Mystery Skype? A few of you, all right. So I'm going to show a video in just a second, but you'll notice that there's also a link to a lesson plan on our agenda. So if you find the Mystery Skype bullet, then underneath that there's a link to the lesson plan, and you can go ahead and open that up, and it describes a little further what we're about to see.
Well, it's almost tea time, so I have to go.
I hope you can find where we are, but I don't really. So, bye. But I said until next time, if there is a next time.
Does your school name have saint in it?
No! A to D. They said it's not from A to D. That's why they got
Wait, support. And the class agrees. Mr. Barnes, are you still there?
Yeah, they don't live in Saskatoon. Okay.
Yeah, that was right. We're Henry Broad, so you guys got it right.
Are you guys from Philadelphia?
Yes.
Do you have a professional NHL hockey team?
Yes.
In the beginning, that was all a trick with the Jamaica and the England and the flag and the clock. If you didn't pick that up, it was all deception.
So what do we like about this lesson? What are some things that we like? High levels of student engagement, we think. What evidence do you have? It appeared as if most of the kids were actively involved. Could you tell if every kid was engaged and involved? Is it possible that some of the kids around the edges may have been less engaged or less involved or less active? Okay. All right. What else? What else do we like about this lesson? Yeah. Okay, so an opportunity to connect with a community other than our own and learn about places and people that are different than ourselves. Might be particularly important when we're homogenous. Yeah, in a positive way. Yeah, sure. Okay, and not just tokenistic, right? Okay, so we liked that there were different roles for different kids with maybe who had different kinds of skills. We would hope that maybe over time that maybe kids got a chance to occupy different roles, maybe even those that didn't play to their strengths. Yes? Right. So it was structured student agency. It wasn't chaos or anarchy, right? It wasn't like Lord of the Flies, just, okay, you're in charge of the class, go. Right? Sure. Right. But there were some structures put in there in which kids could run and play. Okay, what else do we like? Okay. So we think that students got some necessary technology skills out of this. Anything else? Another like or two? Yeah. Okay, so talk a little bit more about the inquiry aspect, please. Okay, what evidence do you have that they were engaged in deep inquiry? They asked questions. What was the one question that you heard them ask? Well, actually, you heard them ask several questions. So, what were the kinds of questions that you heard them ask? Did your city have an NHL team? Well, that's the question they were asked, wasn't it? Right? The questions they asked were, do you have Saint in your school name? Well, the structured activity was that they had to ask questions that had yes or no answers, right? And so we actually didn't hear many of the questions that they asked. The one question that we did hear was, does your school have a saint in it, right? And we don't know, this is why I always ask, what's your evidence? We don't really know what went into the formulation of that question. Were they just randomly guessing? Let's see, a lot of schools around here have saint in their name. Let's ask them that. Right? Or if some kind of analysis and thoughtful discussion went into the formulation of that question. We don't know. We hope that there was some inquiry and some discussion and some deeper thinking that led into whatever questions they asked. But we don't have the evidence on the video at least, right? Yeah? So it was an exciting and engaging use of technology, but perhaps from a curriculum and content and learning standpoint, it could have been deeper. And I think I saw at least one of you throw in a conversation space about concern about where was the rigor, right? What other concerns or issues or other things that you noted maybe on the dislike side or the bad side did we have? What are some things that we thought about? Okay, talk more about that, please. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So just ensuring, again, going back to that issue of active student engagement and that we're not losing kids along the edges. Yep. Okay. What else? Other thoughts or concerns or challenges? Yes? Right, so the logistics of this can be challenging, right? So here's an interesting question for you. What was the learning outcome that the students were supposed to achieve as part of this exercise? What was the stated learning outcome, goal, task, whatever you want to call it? Wasn't it to guess their location? Wasn't that the sum total of the stated learning goal? At least from a content and curriculum standpoint, right? Like we had some process goals, like, you know, working well in groups and hopefully asking good questions and utilizing technology. But from a learning goal, was there a learning goal other than guess where they lived, where they went to school? Did anybody see one? But what's your evidence of that? Right, the objective was to determine the location of another school through yes and no questions, right? Yes, sir? But what evidence do we have that they learned about the area in the city? Does it? Does it talk about what kind of inquiry processes and research processes students will go in? Or does it talk about that at a very generic level? Right. Some, right? Process goal, right? From the learning content. So notice here that we're making a lot of assumptions, right? Or a lot of wishes or hopes. Well, we hope that, we think that, we assume that, there's all this stuff that we didn't see. But we don't know. The lesson plan doesn't really lay that out for us in detail. What we saw on the screen doesn't really throw that out for us. We really want to like this lesson because the kids are excited and engaged and it's cool to connect with another classroom somewhere else. But we have to ask ourselves, what was the ultimate learning objective and did we accomplish that? And if it was a fairly low level objective, could we have done better with this? Right? I had a principal in Illinois talk about this video. He said, is this any different than a teacher holding an index card up to her forehead and saying, guess what location I'm thinking of? You've got 20 questions. Is it any different from that? 20 questions with the location on the card on my forehead. Go. Interesting question, isn't it? Y'all probably wouldn't be so excited about that lesson. So here's the thing. This lesson could be the stage to something bigger and broader, but we don't know. It could be an awesome introduction for a year-long collaboration between these classrooms, which would be awesome. It could be the gateway to some really deep, rich, meaningful learning experience, but we don't know. All we have is what we saw. And unfortunately, when you look at how Mystery Skype plays out across the country, this is it. This is the sum total of the activity. Like it's Mystery Skype for Mystery Skype's sake. You guess the other place's location. It's exciting. It's kind of cool. You guess the other people's place. You get to see some kids from somewhere else. But all those rich opportunities for cultural learning, for cross-geographic connections, for deep inquiry, for deep content learning, and so on, most people, when they do Mystery Skype, don't fold that in. It's just we do this, we pat ourselves on the back for using tech, and then we're done. And we can do better than that. We can do way better than that. And that's the discussion I want us to continue to have after we take the break. Jenny said, activities like this can kill the chance to do the best stuff. Kyle says, Mystery Skype holds so much potential, but it takes an educator willing to facilitate deeper learning to make it work. And I think right there we show the tension, right, is that I don't know if I'm ready to give up on Mystery Skype, but I definitely recognize that we got to put some wraparound stuff, right, to surround that activity, to make it deeper and richer and more meaningful. Otherwise, it's just technology for technology's sake and doesn't really accomplish what we're really hoping will happen with our investments in time and energy and equipment and so on. Now, let me ask you one more question, which is always the fun one, which is this. when you were thinking about Mystery Skype and discussing Mystery Skype, how many of you use some kind of mental model or framework or something to guide your thinking and conversation? Raise your hand. A few of you? So keep your hands up. So what model and framework did you use? Okay, but you didn't have like a specific like tech integration model or framework that you were like pulling questions from or look fors or, okay? Anybody else? So that's pretty typical, and what most of us do in here is that, remember I asked the question like, was it good, was it bad, likes, dislikes? We were winging it, right? We were essentially coming up with whatever list of criteria we thought was important and weighted those accordingly. And I'm guessing that the conversations over here were different from the conversations here, or the conversations over there, because you had different things you were looking for and different things that you thought were important and so on. And so just like we have classroom observation templates and rubrics that help us structure what we see when we visit the classroom, right? We can do the same thing when we think about tech integration and tech infusion in terms of how students and teachers are using it. Now the challenge for us, and I'm going to buffer Kyle's tweet here real quick just to give him credit. The challenge for us is that what we have so far isn't that great. So let me show you a couple things. Sorry, I should have done this during the break. I forgot. So this is the map of one-to-one in Iowa. And as you can see, about half the districts in Iowa, about 180 of 360 or so, have some kind of one-to-one computing initiative where they're giving at least some set of their kids a device 24/7. That's up from 5 districts 5 years ago. And other than Maine, which was a top-down initiative, right, where the governor and so on said every kid across the state gets a laptop, we're pretty sure that Iowa has the second highest prevalence of one-to-one initiatives of any state. And it's all been grassroots, one district at a time deciding to go, while the rest of them supported each other and so on. But when you go visit a lot of these districts, most of these districts, we still see a lot of level 1 and level 2 kind of thinking work, right? So they made the investments in the equipment, they made the investments in the technology and the bandwidth and so on, but learning and teaching haven't changed very much. In other words, the affordances that devices give us to do more powerful work aren't being tapped into. We're not seeing a lot of Marthas and Joshes and so on emerging, at least during the schools. And most of it has to do, again, with this idea that we don't want to give up control. So as we think about how do we, even when we get tech into the hands of kids and teachers, and that's a big if, right? Because you've got to make the investments in the equipment and the bandwidth and the IT support and all that stuff. If we're just doing the same thing we were doing before, right? If we're just replicating old models, what's the point? And a lot of it goes back again to that idea of control. So Peter Pappas talks about the 4 negotiables of student-centered learning. And he says, if you think about who gets to decide what gets learned, the content, and who gets to decide how it gets learned, the process, and who gets to decide how we'll show evidence of our learning, the product, and who gets to decide how that learning evidence will be assessed, right? And for all 4 of those questions, the typical answer is we do as adults. And the point that Pappas is trying to make is that for any of these 4 or all 4, we can start flexing a little bit, right? So there are actually schools that flex on all 4 of these. There are schools around this globe of ours that you can go visit where kids show up every day and the teachers say, what do you want to work on? And how are you going to show that you've learned it? Now go rock out. And there are other schools that say, whoa, we're not ready to go that far yet. But they flex in other ways, right? So you have a lot of new tech schools in Indiana. Right? One of the things that new tech does is they don't flex too much on content, but they flex a lot on process and product and evaluation, particularly process and product. Right? So the teachers will lay out a teacher-created project that meets certain standards, and then the kids have a lot of room to run within that structure, like we talked about with the, right? The ability to be free and to flex within a structured process. Then we come back together upon some mutually agreed upon assessment criteria. And so it's possible to flex in different ways. And it's possible to flex for different time periods or scales. So maybe you just flex on one of these for one day. Maybe you flex on two of these for 4 days. Maybe you flex on one thing over the weekend and you see what they come up with on Monday. I mean, those are less scary for us, right? Because they're smaller scale experiments and pilots, and it's not like we're just basically turning over everything and completely reinventing ourselves from scratch. We can flex in small ways until we get comfortable and then go larger. We've got school districts right now in the region that I serve in Iowa that are doing 2-week-long PBL projects, right? Where they call them like January terms or J terms. So they come back from winter break, and the first 2 weeks, students are engaged in projects, that are primarily teacher-created, although sometimes they're student-created. And they have about 10 days worth, about 50 hours, to work on a project. And it's a different kind of learning. And then they go back to normal school. But that's been a very safe experiment for schools, and while they realize, once they do that a couple times and realize how that could work and what it looks like, now we've got them, they're starting to say, well, what if we did that for all of 9th grade? Like, what if we had a 9th grade academy where kids operated like that, not just for 2 weeks, but all year? What would that look like, right? And Spirit Lake, for example, is going down that path, and so on. So you see how we can grow from smaller scale pilots. So let's take that idea of flexing at various scales and times, and let's think about our own instruction, right? Our own tech-infused learning and teaching. And now the question is, can we come up with some kind of framework or model that helps guide our thinking and conversation? And unfortunately, what's been out there so far is fairly non-helpful. So there's the TPAC model. The TPAC model is what most university researchers use. And it says, oh, okay, so it used to be that you had to know your stuff, that's your content knowledge, and you had to know how to teach it, that's your pedagogical knowledge. Know your stuff and teach it well. And now we've got this new thing called technology that comes in there. It's like this third circle. And instead of living at the intersection of 2 domains, now we have to live at the intersection of 3 domains. Got it? We're like, okay, that makes sense mentally, right? But now, think about the lesson you just saw. Can you diagnose that with a TPAC model? Does that give you concrete suggestions for what to fix or change? Nope. Because there's nothing too specific about the TPAC model. It's a mental framework that you can wrap your head around in about 30 seconds, and then you're like, okay, I get it. But how do we know if you're living in that intersection in the middle? The TPAC model doesn't help us much, does it? Now, the framework that's being used by most K-12 people is called SAMR. And it looks like this. And the idea is that SAMR represents an evolution where down here are those replicative uses, where you're basically substituting technology in to do what we've always done with paper. And up on the other end is transformation, right? Completely reinventing learning and teaching as we know it. And then we got these categories in the middle, augmentation, modification, and so on. So there's your SAMR model. I'll give you 30 seconds to turn to your neighbor, your elbow buddy, and decide which of those 4 categories the mystery Skype lesson fell into. Ready? Go. Okay, time's up. How many of you thought it was substitution? Hands up. How many of you thought it was augmentation? Hands up. How many of you thought it was modification? Hands up. How many of you thought it was redefinition? Hands up. Okay, so we had at least 3 of the 4 categories. I did this last week at the Iowa One-to-One Institute, and we had people in all 4 categories. And again, the challenge with SAMR is that we like the idea of a progression. We have no idea how to tell which category we're in. Like the TPAC model, there's nothing specific about it that's other than one short phrase or whatever that lets us know we're at this level, right? So you can imagine if you're a classroom educator and you're trying to figure out what level is my lesson at, my unit. I have no idea. I'm kind of guessing. I can, again, those unstated criteria, those unstated assumptions, just like when we winged it, right, about what's important to us, what we're looking for, and so on. And those criteria vary from people to people. So I actually don't care about a mental model or a framework. Like, I don't care really what level you're at. I mean, hopefully we're moving towards richer, deeper usage. What I care about is, can we ask questions that get at what we're trying to get at? So my colleague Julie Graber and I, and Julie's one of the smartest people in Iowa in terms of deep thinking with technology, she and I have been trying to come up with a set of questions that we can ask ourselves that say, if we ask these questions, can we get at what we're really looking for? Right? It doesn't matter if it fits into a framework or a continuum or whatever. And we're calling this set of questions the Trudicot. All right? And we didn't really know what to call it, so we tried to come up with some goofy acronym like Technology-Rich Unit Design and Classroom Observation Template. And that's Trudicot. It's like an apricot, but a little sweeter. And the goal here is, could we come up with a set of questions, a template of sorts, right, that would allow us to think about our tech integration within the context of deeper thinking skills and rich disciplinary study, right? Important disciplinary concepts. So if you click on that Trudicot link, because it's red, right, then you can see some of the questions we ask. And notice, for example, that one of the things that we care about, if we think about those three big shifts, is individualization and personalization and agency. So we ask questions like, hey, who got to pick what's being learned? Hey, who got to pick how it got learned? Who got to pick which technology got used? During the lesson, who was the primary driver of the talk time? In other words, who's doing most of the talking, who determines who gets to talk, who's the primary driver of the work time, right? Who's making the decisions about work time, assessing progress, and so on. See the kind of questions that we're asking? To get at agency and ownership and control, because that's important to us. That's one of our shifts that we care about. We want students to be effective communicators and collaborators. So we ask questions like, well, are they communicating? And if so, how? Are they by themselves, pairs, triads, larger groups? If they do get to communicate, instead of just sitting silently at their desk, who do they get to communicate with? Other kids in the class, just the teacher, or do they get to broaden out to other adults outside the school or other students outside the school, and so on. So take a couple minutes with your neighbor, your sort of discussion group, kind of run through the Trudicot real quick. You'll see it has 7 or 8 sections, and then let's come back and say, what kind of questions do we have? Okay, so there's a link there that says, what kind of questions do you have about the Trudicot? Throw those into our discussion space. Okay, I'll give you a few minutes. Go. So we got, is there an app? Not yet. Can we have a pretty short graphic that summarizes it? Maybe, probably not. Where did we start? And so on. So this is really version 1. So Julie and I have been playing around with these question set all year. We've been trying it. We'll go visit classrooms. We'll talk to teachers who are designing units. And we're just trying to see, if these questions are basically getting at what we're trying to get at. There'll probably be a version 2 coming out pretty soon as we tweak some things here and there. One of the things I just wanted to point out real quick, because people often aren't sure what we mean by this, is notice under the critical thinking part it says, these student learning activities and assessments go beyond facts, beyond procedures, and beyond previously provided ways of thinking. And what that really means is that we often say that kids are doing higher level work when they're really spitting back stuff. So for example, I'm a social studies teacher, by history. And so we would say, for example, all right, kids, analyze 3 primary causes of the Civil War, right? And then the students would, lay out 3 causes in their arguments, such and so on, and be like, look, they're doing analytical thinking. But what they're really doing is they're just spitting back something from the textbook that said, here are 3 main causes of the Civil War. Or that worksheet that I handed them that said, here are 5 main causes of the Civil War. Pick 3 for your essay, or whatever. And see how that's not really deep analytical thinking by the students. It's basically regurgitating somebody else's analysis. That's what that means. And that's a real danger in schools, is that we label things as deeper work even when they're not. Okay. So one of you asked, if you're in the PLC model, how do you integrate this? And the question would be, I don't know what your PLCs are doing right now. The typical setup for PLCs is that you're looking at student data and you're figuring out how do you respond, right? This could be done very similarly where instead of looking at student data, you're looking at student and teacher uses of technology, and within that PLC structure, you're having conversations using a tool like the Trudicot to guide those conversations, right? But you're still using that professional learning model where we come together in small groups to dissect and analyze something, and off you go, right? So if you're using your PLC model for process, not just for data and outcomes, then this should fit in quite easily, right? Okay. All right. So let's practice. So we've got the Trudicot now, right? And so we're actually going to shift down. We're going to skip question 4. And so let's do another lesson. So I'm going to go to this lesson called Places People Live. Places People Live. And we're going to do question 5 instead. Now you'll notice that for Places People Live, there's a lesson plan there. I'm actually going to click on that because this one's much more extensive than what you had before. If you click on the lesson plan for Places People Lived, and you will see that there's a whole laundry list. This is a elementary standard. All right, and down you go, a whole laundry list of standards that this lesson addresses. And then down at the bottom is objectives and procedures and materials and assessment and so on, okay? So sort of the meat of it is down toward the bottom, so I wanted to point that out. So we're going to watch a short video.
In this whole group lesson, I use the interactive whiteboard, videos, and still images from websites to teach a lesson about pioneer life, specifically as a way of studying places from the past. In other words, we use technology to give us a richer understanding of life before this level of technology. In this lesson, I want my students to compare diverse places that people have lived over time. I begin the class by showing a video segment from Discovery Streaming, Different Kinds of Shelter.
The reason the houses are the way they're made is because of where they are.
So after we watched this movie, what did we learn about the differences between homes in the past and then homes that we live in now? Video is a powerful tool to help students visualize life in the past and in the present. This helps them understand why the homes were so different. What else?
They use different materials.
Okay, they use different materials. In order to prompt students to compare houses of the past with houses today, I show them several primary source photos from Discovery Streaming, places, learning how houses have changed over time. I also use photographs from the Library of Congress, the American Memory section. We select one or two of these primary source documents of pioneer life to focus our class discussion. To assess student learning, I have the students draw a picture of 2 types of houses they learned about. For this, we used technology that was available in both homes, pencils and paper.
All right, so you saw the lesson in action. You got access to the lesson plan. Here's what I'd like you to do. Now the Trudicot is long, so we're going to pick parts. So if you're on sort of this side of the room, we'll kind of split down the middle here. If you're on this side, I want you to look at sections A and B of the Trudicot, okay? And then think about the lesson that you saw, look at the lesson plan, and then share whatever thoughts you have in our back channel about sections A and B on the Trudicot. So you're going to use A and B on the Trudicot to dissect and analyze what you just saw and the lesson plan. If you're on this side of the room, you're going to use sections G and H of the Trudicot, sections G and H of the Trudicot. And again, you're going to talk with your group about what did we see, ask yourselves the Trudicot questions, and then throw your responses in the back channel. Sections G and H, sections A and B, go. Let's talk about it. All right, Brad's got the mic. So we're looking at agency and ownership in sections A and B, right? Probably in version 2 of Trudicot, we'll somehow collapse these 2 into 1. I'm not sure that the labels for A and B aren't too duplicative. But bottom line is we're thinking about student agency and control and ownership, which is one of our big shifts. So when we think about this lesson within the context of sections A and B. The true Ducat, what do we say? What do we see? Brad's got the mic. Oh, it can be over here. Yeah, on the wrong side. No wonder nobody's raising their hand, Brad.
I thought you were all slackers.
No, they're eager for sections G and H, so it's not there yet. Okay, we're right there. Yeah.
The lesson seemed very teacher-focused, teacher-driven, teacher technology use. That's basically what we saw. It was very teacher-focused.
Yeah. Okay. And actually, one of the things we see with technology in the classroom is that it very much is teacher-used and teacher-directed. In other words, think about all the investments that districts make in things like smart boards or clickers or whatever. Like, we see lots of ways where we purchase technologies and we use them in classrooms that replicate the teacher-focused transmissive model of education. Teachers up front, I'm going to use technology to somehow push stuff out to you, maybe do call and response, right? And what I'm interested in, if we're striving for environments of greater agency, is when do kids get to use the technology and how? And that's a very different way of thinking about it. Go ahead. Right.
I thought the one little gal that looked so pleased with her answer after she answered it just kind of said it all. It's kind of like, oh, I have the right answer.
That's right, exactly, right. Okay, so very teacher-directed. Anything else we want to pull out from sections A and B? All right, let's go over to G and H and let's talk about deeper thinking. All right, that's really section G is trying to run deeper thinking, and H is around sort of how do we pull technology into that, and hopefully we went beyond using tech for tech's sake. And section A and B, you can think about G and H while they talk about it, so see if you agree with them. So who's got some thoughts around section G or section H? What do you think about this lesson? Somebody chime in. We'll call on people, we don't care. We'll just hand you the mic.
We thought it was an example of technology for technology's sake. That you could pull up the pictures, maybe on page 72 of your geography book or whatever it was. And we even thought the quality wasn't that great.
Mm-hmm.
Get on Google Earth and do something a little more exciting with it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Other thoughts about G and H? Do we see any deeper thinking work here? There's lots of no's. Right. So what value did the technology add to this lesson? Any? Okay, there's access to some resources. Who got to use those resources? Mostly. Okay, so they used them to push stuff out. But again, it went beyond whatever we might have in just the textbook, right? Like, I have 2 pictures of historical houses in my textbook. Now here's a dozen on this website or whatever, right? Okay. What other value did the technology add to this process? Yeah? Okay. They're looking up rather than down. Is that good or bad? It's arguable, depending on what the task is. Oh, okay. Yeah, if you want to be teacher-led, that's good. Good point. All right. Now, here comes the really cool part. Take those same Trudicot questions, right? And this time, think about what they're asking. Think about what the Trudicot questions are trying to get at. And use those questions in your 2 sections to make this lesson better. In other words, think about the kind of questions being asked in sections A and B, and then use those questions. How would you redesign this to make it better? Think about the questions in G and H, think about what I'm trying to get at, and think about how would you alter the lesson so that you had different answers to those questions, all right? How would you make this lesson better for the items that are in G and H? Go. Let's make it better. So now notice the Trudicot is big, and so for any given lesson, right, you're probably not going to try and hit on all of these at once, right? We use technology and lessons for different purposes on different days, and we have different objectives. So, for example, I didn't ask you to talk about collaboration and communication. Maybe that's another lesson or another unit for another day, right? So we're going to ignore that part of the Trudicot. But let's say that for this lesson, we were striving for some personalization, some individualization, some student agency and ownership and control. All right, how would we make it better than what we have right now? Brad's got the mic. What ideas do you have?
Well, considering that they are first graders, and barring that they've had some experience using technology, she could give them links to specific sites on the website, put them in maybe groups of 3 or 4 with a computer, and let the students look at 2 different sites and compare and contrast what they see, and then she could bring the groups back together and they can do maybe a web or something, sharing the information that the students notice. That's one way that the kids could have hands-on.
Awesome. It's another way we can make it better. Look, he's not even section A and B, he's got an idea. Awesome.
All right, our class went over to the WAC a couple weeks ago, and we got to see this awesome engineering program where they actually have Connects on like the computer, and they were virtually building models and everything like that. And I thought that would be really cool, instead of just regurgitating a picture of something that they had seen, actually go ahead and find a way to build the model and then describe why they made the choices they did. Maybe give a choice of climate first, make the house fit where they were, and tell why they went that route.
Yeah, and I think that why part is so critical, right? One of the things that's so lacking from this lesson is that they are essentially regurgitating a building, right? And there's nothing in there about label the parts of the building, show how it fits into whatever climate you were given, or anything that shows that they have understanding of the objective, which is why do houses look different in different places, right? All they did was they just drew something, but there's no labeling or explanation or anything, and that part is huge, right? So sure, they could build it or draw it or create it in computer modeling, whatever. There's lots of ways to do that. But the most critical part of that is the labeling and the explaining, right? Because that's really good at then the thinking part. Yeah, cool. What else? How else would we make it better? I know you've talked in your groups about stuff. Let's get a couple more ideas.
I would think it'd be helpful to ask the kids the questions that they may have and kind of see where they take it, and maybe toss in some guidance comments. And I know it's first grade, but then even have the instructor or the leader use the internet to research more of and find out more about the questions that the kids are asking.
Awesome. Okay, let's do one more suggestion up here, and then we'll go over to the other side of the room. So get ready. We're going to ask on 3 or 4 of you guys.
Sort of personalize the learning is maybe have the kids go home and ask their parents where their ancestors were from, and get a little information before, and then they're sort of responsible for looking at the houses that maybe their ancestors lived in and why they lived in those types of environments. It gets sort of the parents involved, talking to their kids, and makes more of a personal sort of connection to their ancestors.
Awesome. Okay, sections G and H. I'll pull them up here on the screen. So critical thinking and beyond tech for tech's sake. What suggestions do we have for making it better? Come on this side of the room.
We were talking about the use of Mimeo and actually getting the kids interacting and having different pictures in different locations and having them match up. Why would you have an igloo? What country would that go? What state would that go with? And so some of the way that you can get those first graders up there interacting and moving pieces around.
Cool. Another way to make it better. Deeper thinking beyond tech for tech's sake. Brad, just hand some group the mic because they talked about something.
Or you could give the students, after they've had some background in all this, a region, have them research what the conditions and resources are there, and then have them design a home based on those things.
Cool. 2 great ideas. Another one back there, Brad. We're doing cross-group ideas here. We'll let this be our last one.
We were talking about, since they were first graders, maybe giving them, the idea that a friend lived in one of these houses back then, and then having them tell you a story about that friend's day, their life, things that happened in the house, and then kind of compare that to their own home, their own lives, talk about how they're the same and different. I think you also could give them like a set of characteristics for climate and region before you ever did any of this, and then have them draw or design a house that would seem to work well there, and then show them real examples and have them see how their projected idea was same or different from what it looked like.
Excellent. So all great suggestions, right? And so the reason that Julie and I are finding promise in the TrueDecot is that we're finding that when we ask ourselves really concrete questions, we not only can diagnose and analyze, well, is it there or not? And if it's not there, but it's something we were trying to make happen for this lesson or unit, then becomes can we make it better? Can we use these questions to help us make it better, right? So we were striving for agency and personalization. We fell short of the mark when we actually asked ourselves the questions, what could we do to increase student agency? Here's some things to consider, right? And we're finding that classroom educators and administrators are able to take these kinds of more concrete questions and are able to do a fantastic job of rebuilding things to make it even better, right? Okay, so that was take one. Now, let's redo that, and let's crank it up about 6 notches, and we can do that, and the TrueDecot helps with the conversation. And that's why Julie and I are excited about it, is because it allows us to structure our thinking and discussion in a way that's fruitful, okay? So we're going to do one more. This time I'd like your group to pick any 2 sections of the TrueDecot at once. So I'll give you 45 seconds or so. You guys pick which section of the TrueDecot you want to use this time, and we'll look at one more lesson, okay?
All right, today's lesson is on plate tectonics. Now, Google Earth is a perfect tool to make plate tectonics real for these students. But first, I need to build a little background and make sure that they have the correct terminology and descriptions. Now, the Earth as it spins at thousands of miles an hour is a quiet, sleeping giant. And then out of nowhere, boom! Things start moving and shaking and bouncing and melting. And with the important stuff covered, we visit a webpage that has a great illustration of the concepts we are about to address. I have them copy this illustration into their notebooks. Then, we go to Google Earth and take a close look at the oceanic crust and continental crust of tectonic plates. I encourage the students to write down thoughts, ideas, and observations as we look at the images. This is going to help them as they move into the next part of the lesson. The students then begin to work in pairs and visit a great site that has actual animations of the Earth's movement. I ask the students to view the animations and read the descriptions. Using their research, they prepare a short presentation for the whole class. And at the end of the lesson, the students should have a complete grasp of the concept of plate tectonics and the groundbreaking potential of technology.
Okay, so you have the lesson plan. You just watched the video. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes or so to run it against your 2 sections of the TrueDecot, and please throw your thoughts into our back channel, okay? Go. So I hope you're starting to see the utility of something like the TrueDecot. Again, TrueDecot is in version 1. You know, Julie and I don't claim to have all the answers, but we're finding that the concreteness of the questions helps us look at our tech-infused lessons in ways that are productive and fruitful, right? With the ultimate goal, of course, of make it better. Not judgment, not evaluation, not like this stinks and you're a bad teacher, but in the sense of, hey, if we're trying to move in certain directions as a system, as a classroom, as an educator, as students, let's ask ourselves some concrete questions in terms of saying, all right, so here's my initial idea, now how can we make that better, right? And the PLC structure is ideally suited for this because those conversations are much better when you have them with peers than by yourself, because they'll have different lenses and different ideas, and that brainstorming, that bouncing back and forth of how do we make this better on whatever criteria we choose can really be fruitful, right? And when that colleague of yours says, you know, couldn't we take that mystery Skype activity and get some more deep disciplinary learning into it? Couldn't we take that mystery Skype activity and give kids a different kind of agency that's maybe more meaningful? Couldn't we take that mystery, right? And on we go. And that's what we're really striving for. Now, I gave you a bunch of other lessons that you all can play around with and practice with. In fact, there's a host more that we can do. But the reason I like to do these together is that once we get used to having the conversation with lessons that aren't ours, right, in ways that are productive, then we can flip that around and hopefully do that the same with lessons that are ours, so that we don't feel threatened, we don't feel defensive, or we simply use it as a lens for conversation. Say, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I tried last week, help me make it better, and use something like the Trudicot to help us get there. Does that make sense? Okay. So I hope that's useful to you. This has not been a rah-rah keynote. This has been a like roll up our sleeves and let's get to work on meaningful stuff kind of keynote. So hope that's okay. Because that's what we did. All right, let's wrap this up. So somewhere along the line over the last 100 years or so, we forgot what we knew back in the days when learning for most youth, beyond some rudimentary reading and arithmetic, meant learning to run the farm or maybe an apprenticeship with the local cooper or blacksmith or tanner. Somewhere along the way over the last 100 years, we elevated the academic work over the purpose behind the work. We forgot that the best learning experiences are hands-on and applied. They're ones that are immersed in the real world. Somehow we forgot that authentic, powerful learning rarely takes the form of a worksheet. It rarely takes the form of end-of-chapter review problems. It rarely takes the form of a multiple-choice quiz. That's not authentic, powerful learning. We've forgotten that true deep learning is rarely linear, and it's almost never neatly organized by chapters and sections. And so as we think about navigating these shifts, the shift from lower level thinking to higher level thinking more often, sure, kids still need to know stuff. We still need to know facts and procedures. But can we make that the foundational floor rather than the ceiling? Can we make that something that leads us to something bigger and better rather than the sum purpose of who we are as an organization or as a state? As we move from analog to digital, as we recognize that everything around us is technology suffused, how do we stay relevant to that world and give kids the skills they need to be powerful in that landscape? That requires you to rethink your policies from acceptable use to empowered use, by the way. And as we try to make this shift so that we get more Marthas, more Joshes, more Laurens, more Tabbies, more Emmas, right? Is that how do we help kids do amazing stuff? And that means we've got to give up some control. Navigating those shifts is going to be really hard for us. It's going to require us to live way outside our comfort zones. Right? We're going to have to take risks. Growth and change doesn't occur if we're not willing to try stuff. But I truly believe that as educational communities, that we really can be extraordinary together if we choose to be. That we really can give kids wings. And they will amaze us on a day-to-day basis if we work toward that goal. So I'm hopeful that you will join me in the cause. And I wish you best of luck with all your future ventures. Thanks for having me here.